Good afternoon. It's October 13th, 2024. We're critiquing the news. The article on your screen is from the Sunday Mail and it's titled Sweat and Wet on the Way. And once again, as usual, a story based on a Bureau of Meteorology press release that's literally dripping with latent climate alarmism gets prime position in the newspaper. At the top of the first page, the reader sees when he or she opens the cover. Let's just pick some paragraphs out of this story. Queenslanders should brace for above average rainfall, severe tropical cyclones and sweltering temperatures this summer, the Weather Bureau has warned. Well, in actual fact, the artificial rainfall has nothing to do with man-made CO2. It is in fact an artifact of the undersea Tonga volcanic eruption in February 2022, which injected some 1.7 trillion tonnes of electrically charged water vapour and rock dust, not just into the troposphere, not just into the stratosphere, but all the way up into the mesosphere. And it would, we estimate at the time, take 4 years for that to come down, and that would be nucleating one heck of a lot of clouds in that time, which is why we've seen wet weather since then. But of course, the Bureau of Meteorology won't factor in events like that, and therefore it couldn't predict that rain. Now also, further along in the article, it says above average maximum temperatures are also likely in the north of the state, where minimum temperatures are very likely to be unusually high. One of the ways they achieve this little trick is by cooling the temperatures of the past. As I mentioned in another video, just ask Cloncurry what happened to their record 53.1 degrees Celsius on the 16th of January 1889, airbrushed from history by so-called homogenisation of old records by activists embedded in BOM. And this is the way that they cool the past to make the present seem hotter. As well as that, they've changed the temperature recording devices. They no longer use liquid in glass. They use electronic sensors, which of course are subject to programming and which they won't allow experts to test, and which don't subscribe to international, don't conform rather to international standards, which smacks of activism the whole way through. If you were an organisation filled with far left global warming activists, that's exactly the sort of thing you'd do, and you'd avoid the scrutiny that people on my side would have liked to apply. Then they move on to cyclones. While the Bureau has predicted an average tropical cyclone season, 11 tropical cyclones in the Australian region and 4 making landfall, more severe cyclones are predicted. Well, goodness me, we've only been hearing this since the mid-80s, I do believe, and in fact in that time the number of severe cyclones crossing the coast and impacting towns and cities has declined. This is an artifact of the slight warming in the poles, which is an artifact of electrical interference from the sun, or not interference, it's more an electrical input from the sun, which makes the poles slightly warmer, which reduces the temperature differential between the poles and the equator, and that temperature differential is one of the drivers of cyclone formation. And cyclones, by the way, are electromagnetic systems, as is everything. Just ask Nikola Tesla. It's a shame we don't have access to his records and notes, isn't it? Now, one of the tricks they've been using to make up their total number of cyclones, even when we have very quiet cyclone seasons, is they name storms that nobody gets to see because they're using satellite measurements, they're taking the measurements at a very high altitude, and there's just no one on the ground or no one on the ocean that actually witnesses these storms. But, technically they exist because the satellites are up there imaging them. Now, they further continue here. Based on historical patterns alone, a near average number of tropical cyclones in the Australian region could be expected this season, with a high proportion likely to be severe. But there's no basis for that. I mean, that could happen, but it could equally go the other way. This is pure guesswork, but it's designed to make it sound like the climate is getting worse. In fact, it's not. We're living in a particularly blissful period of human history in terms of climate, and the number of fatalities from climate-related events are at an all-time low due to modern construction materials, which are only possible because we learned to tap into the hydrocarbon molecules such as coal, oil and gas. Now, they continue, any tropical cyclone can be dangerous, and it only takes one to significantly impact communities. Last year we had 8 tropical cyclones, and almost no major communities were affected. Cairns got a bit damp, wouldn't have had the sort of flooding that we experienced, except for there's more development on the floodplain, and they haven't been dredging the river. You know, we used to know to do things like that, dredge rivers and clean drains to allow runoff to get away, but no, we don't do that anymore because then we can blame the floods on climate change. So the Weather Bureau tipped the whole of Australia to experience one of the hottest summers on record. And again, when you cool the past, it looks like that. But in fact, the hottest years in Australia's history were the Federation drought in the 1890s through to the early 1900s. And the other paragraph I wanted to quote here, Australians living in the north and east have been warned to brace for humid conditions in the coming months. Humid conditions in the wet tropics, what a surprise. Perhaps these cooler stints of weather compared to summers gone by might be a bit briefer or more mild, with the operative word being might, because they don't know, they don't have the technology to know, and they don't factor in all the influences on climate, the electromagnetic influences from the sun in particular, so therefore they can't make accurate predictions. In reality, as we've all come to know only too well, the BOM's weather prediction success has declined alarmingly since that once respected institution was infiltrated and subverted by extreme left political activists. In the 1970s, when I was a kid, before supercomputers and politically driven climate alarmism, when forecasts were made by people with immense knowledge and experience but no political agenda, my father could plan our reef trips in the family boat 6 weeks in advance. You can't do that now because the BOM can't accurately forecast the weather for the next day because they injected climate alarmism into supercomputers. Now, do you remember last winter when sheep and cattle farmers sold masses of stock because the BOM predicted a very dry season? They were very wrong. It was a wet winter and farmers suffered financially due to the BOM's expert wrongology, but people like me predicted it because, well, we understood the effects of all that cloud nucleation from that underwater volcano off Australia's coast. Now, people like me who factor in the drivers of weather that the BOM refuses to acknowledge said it would be a wet winter. We were right, but we were conspiracy theorists. And, you know, we get these labels get thrown at us to discredit us, but, you know, if we're to be tallying up a score sheet of how many conspiracy theorists have come true since 2020, then the alarmists and the fright bats on the left would have a big fat 0, and we conspiracy theorists would have a very high score indeed. So there now exists an abundance of weather forecasters that do a much better job than BOM, and the time has come to defund that hotbed of political activism and to use a small amount of the $400 million per annum saving to pay local people to maintain weather recording stations. Let's put all that data online in real time and allow any weather enthusiast to download it, and let's have a decentralized weather database that can't be homogenized by left-wing activists within the government sector. We need to get political climate alarmism out of our governments and their services before it completely destroys our productive economy and everything that depends on it. And part of that requires getting the Labor and Liberal Uni Party out of our parliaments.